Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Chicago at the People's Summit. And now joining me at the People's Summit is Jane Kim. Jane's a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, which is sort of the same thing as being on the City Council. Her landmark initiatives include leading San Francisco to be the first city in the country to make community college free for all residents. The Fair Chance Act, which removed barriers to employment and stable housing for millions of Californians who have a conviction record. Passing a minimum wage law to increase minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2018. Fought to increase the affordable housing requirement from 12 to 25%, and has won an unprecedented 40% affordable housing requirement in 2 major development projects in her district. Thanks for joining us, Jane.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I mean, that's a heck of a record.
Thank you.
So, before we get into some of the legislation you've passed, because I think it suggests a model for a lot of other cities about what's possible, a little bit of your backstory politically. You ran for state senate, and you won the Democratic Party primary. You wound up losing the election, but it's an interesting story. Your opponent spent, what was it, $7 million to defeat you?
So we came in first place in the primary after being outspent 2-1 in the race.
And Bernie Sanders campaigned for you.
Senator Sanders campaigned with me and endorsed me in my race for state senate. And our opponent ended up outspending me almost 4-1. He spent $6.75 million in the general election against me.
And why did they throw so much money to defeat you? And where did money came from where?
Well, you know, this was the first state senate race in San Francisco.
Democrat versus Democrat, which is something peculiar about California.
Yeah, so San Francisco is a Democratic town, and so all of our elected officials are under the Democratic Party. But we have a whole range of what it means to be a Democrat, similar to the rest of the nation. And what we saw in November was an unprecedented amount of money. It was the first state senate race we had seen post-Citizens United. And so actually most of that $6.7 million was independent expenditures that came from the realtors, the private charter school movement, Chevron, and other private interests.
So then you were already on the Board of Supervisors, so you stayed on.
Yes.
All right, so let's get to this wealth tax to start with. Free college tuition for all residents of San Francisco, and how you're paying for it.
Well, so San Francisco has a crazy luxury housing market, as you probably have heard, one of the highest housing costs in the country. And so we thought, well, why not ask those with the most to give just a little bit more to make San Francisco a more equitable city for everybody. San Francisco has the fastest growing income gap in the country, according to the Brookings Institute. And according to our own Human Services Agency data, we have a wealth gap that is akin to the country of Rwanda. In fact, Rwanda shares and distributes its wealth slightly better than San Francisco. And so we thought it was important to put on a progressive fair share economy package before the voters. And we thought a lot about, well, what is the best way for us to spend down that revenue? And during the time, it was...
How much are we talking about?
The revenue generates on average $44 million a year for the city. $44 million.
And that's enough to pay for college for everybody.
Well, the story was, this was late 2015. Bernie Sanders was campaigning. He was talking about free college. And we were really inspired by that message. And then the Labor Council had approached us and said, you know, what can we do for our community college, which at the time was really faltering and had a declining enrollment. And so they said, why don't we make City College free? And so we looked at the numbers, and it actually wasn't that expensive. It costs the city roughly $10 to maybe $12 million a year to make community college free. And so we worked on this ballot measure, and we went to the voters last November, and we won with 63% of the vote. And we had...
How vigorously was it opposed?
Well, you know...
Now, how much are we talking about? Like, an average wealthy house is defined as what in San Francisco?
So we limited the tax to buildings and homes of $5 million and above, and we also created a completely new bracket for homes and buildings of $25 million and above. And it was a very modest increase, anywhere from 0.5 to 1% increase, and it generates a lot of money for the city and county.
That's way less than they're paying their real estate agent.
Way less.
Why so modest? If you're going to do this, why so small?
Why so small?
Yeah.
Which part?
The percentage. No, this is like a land transfer tax, essentially.
So
right? You buy a $10 million house,
Yeah.
you have to pay this half a point to a point.
Well, we wanted to win, and we polled, and we just thought, what will the voters withstand, and how can we minimize the opposition as much as possible? And so we tried to balance generating enough revenue to make community college free, and limiting the tax increase so that the opposition was minimal. And while there was opposition, there wasn't as much money spent because it was, again, a very modest tax increase.
And did you get the argument, you can't do this, people will move, or no one's moving out of San Francisco because they have to pay another point on their house?
Well, I do a lot of work around affordable housing, as you just mentioned, and initially I had thought about investing that money in affordable housing, but we looked at the data, and in San Francisco, an individual that has an associate's degree from City College makes on average $11,000 to $12,000 more than the same individual with just a high school diploma. And so we thought investing in human capital is a way of putting more money, real money, in the pockets of everyday San Franciscans. And I think it's really important for government to constantly rethink what it means to provide their citizens a foundation to successfully enter into the middle class.
So this is won by referendum, not by city council vote.
Right.
Could you have won a city council vote, or do you need the city council vote to get it to referendum?
In California, we have a very unfortunate ballot measure that passed back in 1978 called Proposition 13, and it does require any tax measures increases to go before the voters.
Now, talk about the minimum wage, because that's a fight that's been waging everywhere. We're headquartered in Baltimore.
Right.
We just had a situation where the city council passed a very weak $15 an hour raise, which I think wouldn't take full effect until about 2024 or something. And yet, it still got vetoed by the mayor with the argument that you can't have it unless all the surrounding counties have it because businesses just move and all that. You must have had the same argument in San Francisco. Why were you able to win that? And that was by city council vote?
This was also a ballot measure.
Also a ballot measure.
Yeah. So in San Francisco, actually back in 2003, San Francisco had passed a modest increase to our minimum wage ahead of the state of California. And all the businesses and employers made this argument, San Francisco is going to lose jobs, it's going to lose jobs. So in 2014, when we started hearing about the Fight for 15 that was going across the country at that time, Labor had come and said, we want to go to the ballot and aggressively move up the minimum wage to $15 an hour. There was a ton of opposition from the employers and the mayor and many members of the Board of Supervisors, and our office had come in to help negotiate a deal where we would have a unified approach to the minimum wage ballot. And what we put forward and what passed was raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour for all San Franciscan employees by 2018 without healthcare credit, tip credits, and no carve-outs.
By carve-outs, you mean what? Smaller, no exemption for smaller businesses?
We didn't do an exemption for small businesses. And actually, the small businesses said that when minimum wage went up ahead with the larger employers, they ended up having to meet that wage anyway, just to be able to compete on the market.
Workers.
Mm-hmm.
So to get it on the ballot itself, how do you get it on the ballot? You need so many signatures and you get it on the ballot.
Yeah, so there are several ways to get measures on the ballot in San Francisco. One is that you submit it through the Board of Supervisors, either with 4 signatures or with 6 votes of the board, or you gather signatures amongst the voters.
So I gather now that the $15 passed and you're getting close to it implementing, most of the businesses in San Francisco have left the city now.
That's right. Our economy has dramatically collapsed.
It's kind of contradictory because you want to tax big houses, but they're all going to leave now because of the $15.
Right. Well, so minimum wage will rise to $14 an hour in a few weeks, July 1st.
A single business left?
You know, it's hard to calculate, but we've only been growing jobs in San Francisco. And in many ways, we're very fortunate. I represent a very wealthy city. And so I think one of my responsibilities is to put forward dream policies that other municipalities can't even afford to fantasize about, to show that it can work and what happens when we do those things. So what happens when we raise the minimum wage? What happens when we make community college free for all? And not to quote our president, but what it really means to make America great again.
But you did just quote
I did just quote the president.
Okay. Even on development projects, to get a 40% affordable housing, I mean, take all these measures, including a measure I guess you weren't involved with and predated you, but you have virtually single-payer health care of a sort in San Francisco.
Yeah.
If you live in San Francisco, you get health care, period, right?
Yeah.
Do you think this is applicable to poorer cities, like, for example, Baltimore? Any of this stuff, is it applicable?
Well, I think what makes it applicable is that we demonstrate that it can work, that a city doesn't collapse when it happens, that in fact a city grows economically when we support our citizens, especially the ones that are most vulnerable. And it's true, certain cities don't have as much revenue as San Francisco, which is why we try to pilot really progressive policies for the country. But it doesn't mean that the state can't implement a universal healthcare system in a city like Baltimore. And by proving that we're actually saving money in the long term and growing a stronger economy.
Maryland, for example, is one of the richest states in the country. In fact, apparently there's more millionaires in Maryland than any other state in the country.
I did not know that.
Yeah. It's one of the stats cited. I'm not sure it's true. Have you, the fight for this was also a fight within the Democratic Party. I mean, they went after you on your bid for state senate. I would assume partly because of your record on the city board of supervisors / city council. And take that to where we are at the People's Summit, which is a lot of the conversation here is about if you're going to fight the oligarchy that Sanders says is the target here, if you want change, but the oligarchy exists within the Democratic Party. And like Baltimore, San Francisco, the fight is all in the Democratic Party. There's no Republican Party to speak of. What do you make of it, nationally, as you had experience locally? Is the Democratic Party at a national level, is it possible to have wins where at the local level it seems, yes, like in a San Francisco, you can actually beat back at a city level the power of the corporate Democrats to some extent and pass the kind of legislation. Do you think that's possible at a national level?
Well, one of the reasons why I supported Bernie Sanders is because he proved that independent candidate with really progressive values could capture the attention of Americans and its support. And so I do think it's possible, but it's a movement that we have to grow. It's in some ways easier on the local level. When I first ran for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, I didn't have a single endorsement. The Democratic Party didn't endorse me. None of the newspapers endorsed me. Labor Council, Chamber of Commerce. But we were able to go door to door, and we're able to win that seat. And even in San Francisco, a city that is viewed as incredibly progressive, I think we're plagued by the same issues within our Democratic Party that plagues the Democratic Party nationally. Everyone in San Francisco is progressive until money's involved.
Yeah, the same story for Baltimore.
Right, and so, you won't find an elected that doesn't believe in LGBT rights and gay marriage. But when you ask them, how much are you willing to exact from market rate housing developers? How much are you willing to tax corporations? Then you start to see a fissure within the Democrats in San Francisco. And one of the reasons why I ran for state senate in California is because even though the Democrats have a supermajority in both houses at Sacramento, we're seeing an increasing number of these business-friendly Democrats move up to the Capitol. And we're seeing a Capitol that is increasingly being strangled almost by lobbyists and corporate interests.
All right, thanks very much for joining us, Jane.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.